I go and I talk to the actors and I say, hey, so the director is asking for this, this, and this. How do you feel about that? What are your boundaries? And then we have a conversation. And if there's like any discrepancy between the two, I go back to the director and I'm like, hey, so-and-so doesn't feel comfortable with doing this. But when I was talking to them, we discussed this as an alternative. So I try and like troubleshoot, and kind of like come up with, well, we can't do this, but how about this option? And get them, as close as possible to whatever it was they were asking for.
You're listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. This is the podcast where I talk to successful women in entertainment and hear their stories. Our presenting sponsor is the entertainment payroll company Extreme Reach. What you may not know about Extreme Reach is that they are already an industry disruptor in the areas of creative asset management and video ad distribution. And now they are poised to disrupt the entertainment payroll business. If you are creating content, you need them. Call them and tell them I sent you. Today we have something new for the podcast and new for the industry. I sat down with Amanda Blumenthal, who is one of a handful of people working in the new position called Intimacy Coordinator. She is currently working on the HBO show called Euphoria. She breaks down for us what the job really entails, how her unique background, education, and work history prepared her perfectly for it, the real need for this position on the set. It makes total sense, and it's one of those things that makes you hit your forehead with your palm and ask, why haven't we always had this? Because of the nature of her job, we talk about grown-up themes and use explicit sex terms, so you have been warned. Whether or not you want your kids to listen is up to you. You can find us at theother50percent.com for added features, photos, show notes, and the merchandise. And you can listen on Apple Podcasts and all the podcast places. And I want to start making you aware of a new podcast that is launching next month. It's called Catch a Break, and it's the insider's guide to breaking into and navigating Hollywood. I'm hosting it, but it's also produced by Jeanette Volturno, Marcy Brown, Jessica Milanofi, Rick Osako, and Shirley Davis. This show is a series of conversations with panels made up of industry insiders and veterans where we tackle all kinds of topics, starting with things they didn't necessarily teach in film school. In addition to the conversations, we will also be giving away bonus materials, breakout sessions, videos, and samples to help round out the experience. Season 1 launches in April. Go to catchabreakpodcast.com and subscribe so you will know when it's live. All right, here's my conversation with Amanda Blumenthal. Have a listen. First of all, what you do is so unique. Tell me what you do.
So I'm an intimacy coordinator. Currently, I'm working on an HBO drama series called Euphoria, and it's basically a show about teenagers. It's a coming-of-age story set, in modern times. So there's social media, there's exploring sexuality, there's alcohol and drug use, and all different shades and layers of those different themes of what it means to be a modern teenager.
It has all the things.
Everything.
Okay, now let's drill down, because this is brand new, an intimacy coordinator.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So basically what my job is, like the core of it is to make sure that actors are safe on set during nudity and simulated sex scenes. And that's like the first thing that I explain to actors when they're like, I don't know who you are and why you're talking to me. I'm like, I'm here to make sure your boundaries are enforced and that you feel safe.
This is a job whose time has come.
Yes.
Like, what took it so long?
Oh my goodness. Well,
let's talk about how did it come about, because this is a pretty new thing.
Right. There's like one differentiation I like to make because there's confusion about the terminology out there. Mm-hmm. So intimacy coordination specifically refers to film and television.
Okay.
Sometimes you'll hear the term intimacy director, and that refers to theater.
Oh, okay.
That's like the term that they use. So,
and I bet you have to be careful in film and TV, so you're not, like, it's not a DGA
It's a
position.
DGA issue if we were to call ourselves intimacy directors.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're coordinators, and intimacy direction started in the theater in like the early 2000s. So like even that is like very recent. And then there were a couple people doing intimacy coordination on like indie films and like stuff like that, probably starting around like 2010, like in that time frame.
Okay.
And then like intimacy coordination as like a thing, I say with air quotes, that's what I say to feel, a thing, started really with HBO's The Deuce in their second season, which filmed this past spring, I believe. And the reason that started is because the actress Emily Mead, who's on The Deuce, went to the show creators and was like, hey guys, I think we need someone who can be an advocate for the actors during sex scenes.
Because on that show, they had a lot of extras coming in doing sex scenes.
Yes.
Which must be awkward.
Yes. And they're not trained. So,
right.
You know, they're just like, this is great.
It's a free-for-all.
Yeah, it's a total free-for-all.
No.
It can be, yeah.
Okay. Were you the intimacy coordinator on that show?
No, so that is Alicia Rodas.
Okay.
She's New York-based. And while that was filming is when Euphoria started. And because they had such a good experience with her on The Deuce, they were like, HBO was like, we need this on all our shows. And because Euphoria has not only a lot of sex and nudity, but also really young actors, like they're playing high schoolers, and a lot of them are like 18, 19, 20 years old. And a lot of them, it's also their first show. And so they were like, okay, we need to have this role on this set in order, you know, to make sure like nothing bad happens and they have a good experience and that everything is kosher, as I like to say.
HBO leading the way once again.
Always.
So let's talk about your background. How did you end up getting this job that is just so brand new and made up?
Yeah.
What's your background?
When I was in college, I went to Pomona College in Claremont for 2 years, and then I ended up transferring to USC, and that's where I finished. When I was at Pomona, I was part of a group called Advocates for Survivors of Sexual Assault. And so I did a lot of advocacy work around sexual assault survivors and things like that. A lot of like educational workshops. And then I also joined a group called Sex Positive Los Angeles, which is a nonprofit. They do a lot of education stuff more broadly around sexuality. So I helped to lead workshops around like a variety of topics related to like LGBTQ rights, kink-friendly stuff, polyamory, like the whole gamut of sexuality, like swinging, like whatever, like you can think of, like that's like SPLA like works to educate about those kinds of things and like de-shamify like this broad spectrum of human sexuality.
What was your major?
So at Pomona, my major was movement studies and I was pre-med.
Okay.
At USC, I finished pre-med. At the very end, decided I didn't want to go to medical school as I was applying.
Good to know.
Yes, and my degree from USC is in the School of Gerontology, and it's in Human Development and Aging.
Wow. Okay, so just this smorgasbord of, is that the word, smorgasbord?
Yes.
Of interest in education. That seems like it perfectly prepared you for this.
Yeah, and then so I also did a sex and relationship coach training program, and that's what I was doing before this, is I was doing coaching. And so
okay, let's break that down.
Okay.
Say that again.
So I did a sex and relationship coach training program. I trained to be a sex and relationship coach.
And what does that person do?
So basically you can work with individuals or couples or moresomes, meaning, you know, if you
moresomes.
meaning, you know, like if you had a triad or you have some interesting configuration of like a polyamorous group or an open relationship group, right? I usually work with couples or single men. And so basically a lot of it is working around, number one, building communication skills. So building empathy, learning how to have repair conversations with your partner and other people in life. Like one of the big things is like if you want to have better sex, you have to be a better communicator. So that's like
makes sense.
Foundation, right? That's like where we start. Then other parts of it where I do a lot with attachment theory work, which is work around what was the bond like with your attachment figure when you were a child, your attachment figure being like your mom or your dad or your primary caretaker, and what kinds of like childhood wounds do you have from that, and how is it now playing out in your adult relationship? So I do a lot of work with that. I know. And then the fun part comes, which is exploring like sexual fantasies, like what is your sexuality? How do you bring that to your partner? A lot of people have fear of being shamed or rejected by their partner for their sexuality. And so I would do work with that.
First of all, you are so mature and cool about this. How did you know you had an interest and know you could handle this subject matter in a way that could help people? Like, it's such a unique thing, and most people are so screwed up around all of it. Like, how did you know this was something you could do?
I had, when I was in school, I had several friends who were survivors of sexual assault. And that really made an impression on me because in a couple of situations, I was one of their big support systems. And so that's what kind of drove me to join Survivors of Sexual Assault and do that kind of work because it had impacted me so much, having friends who had gone through that. And this was when I was 19. So then, when I was around 21, I joined Sex Positive LA, and that just opens up your whole.
Everything.
And then also when I was in school, because Pomona's major liberal arts college, they were they make you take, a variety of classes, and I did a lot of gender studies classes, things like that. So I had exposure there as well.
Fascinating. Okay, so how did that then lead to this job?
So, my mother's an executive at HBO.
Should we say who she is?
Yes.
Your mom is Ginny Nugent.
My mom is Ginny Nugent.
And now the whole city just said, "Oh, I love Ginny Nugent," because that's the only response you ever get when you say Ginny Nugent.
That's what I get all the time. Every time I say that, that's what people tell me. I love your mom.
Yeah, she's like a celebrity. And early episode on this podcast, if you'd like to go listen.
Yes. So my mom is Ginny Nugent, and I was visiting with her one weekend, and she was saying, I have this show, we need this person to do this intimacy coordinator thing, and I have no idea who I'm going to hire. We've interviewed all these people, and they're just not right. And my boyfriend was with me, and he turned to my mom, and he was like, Ginny, your daughter would be perfect. And I was like, yeah, please, let me apply. This sounds like my jam, right up my alley.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, I don't know, okay.
And then it's nepotism and it's weird. So then how does she put you forward with a way that doesn't look like, oh, I want to get my kid this job?
Right, exactly. No, so she was like, we're going full disclosure. Everyone has to know you're my kid. We had to go through business affairs at HBO to get approved and all this stuff. But before all that happened, she was like, well, I'll let you interview, but you have to get the job yourself. And I was like, great, that's all I'm asking for. So, I went and I interviewed, and they hired me on the spot. They were like, we want you. This is
They're
great.
Like, you're the one.
Yeah, because the show...
Ginny who?
Because the show, deals with a variety of taboo topics. And so they were like, we need someone who's familiar with it, who's comfortable talking about these things, who, isn't going to be freaked out by it. And I was like, I'm your person.
Yeah, obviously you're the person. Yeah. In 5 minutes of talking to you, you're the person.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about your first day on set. How did you know what to do, and what did you do?
So part of what they did was, because The Deuce was still filming, before Euphoria started, they had me go visit the set of The Deuce and shadow Alicia for a day, just to see, how she interacts with all the different people on set and stuff like that. So, and then I also got to pick her brain. And, she sat down with me, we had an hour-long conversation, and pulled out my pen and paper and took copious notes. And so that was really helpful.
And was this your first time on set?
No. Oh my God. I have my earliest memories are from being on set, because my mom was a line producer.
You were hanging out on set.
Yeah.
But was this your first time working on set?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I got to pick Alicia's brain, and then HBO has guidelines that they've created, and so they were in the rough draft process at this point, and so that gave me some guidance, but otherwise they were kind of well, here's the end result of what we want.
Here's the goal of the outcome.
Yes. Now just get there.
Wow.
So it's it's not. I didn't completely reinvent the wheel, right? Because I had, coaching from other people around me, but part of it is you also have to figure out what's right for your show. And so what works, on The Deuce may not work on Euphoria, and like vice versa. And a lot of it is like, what personalities are you dealing with, and like what is like the comfort level and the experience of the actors, and so that all kind of changes the interactions and stuff like that.
So your job is to advocate for the actors?
Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself in a position where there's conflict and you really have to advocate for the actors?
I've had situations where I've had to go to the director and be like, hey, you have one more shot. Like, you have one more take with this person because they're getting overwhelmed.
They've had it.
And they're like tapped out. And every time I've only had to do that maybe like once or twice, but the directors have like always heard me. They're like, yeah, totally understand. Like, we'll just get, this one and then we're going to get out. And I mean, sometimes, like there's things where they're like, when I first start a conversation with a director, I ask them like, if you could have everything you wanted, what does that look like? Because it's like, I want to know like, what are your biggest wishes? And then I will go find out what we can get.
Yeah.
Because I'm the advocates for the actors, but I also see my job as helping to like make as much as I can, like bring the creative vision to life.
Like, how can we get there while keeping everyone safe and comfortable? Interesting.
It's basically like mediation,
Yeah.
which is what I do with couples. So we have this exercise called bridging fantasies. And so, because sometimes you'll have people who are into totally different things, right? And so one person will be like, maybe they have a foot fetish, right? And then like the other person is like, I like romantic sex, right? And it's like, how do you bring those two things together? And like make both people like reasonably happy. And so it's kind of like the same thing.
So it's a negotiation.
It's a negotiation, yeah.
That's so interesting. So like, I kind of want to hear about like the day-to-day, the minute-to-minute. Like if you have a scene and you start to break it down, because I was reading something about how, like on The Deuce, they've developed a barrier between actors, which has helped with some things. Like, what are some things like that you work on?
Yeah, so the costumers on The Deuce specifically, created this. It basically looks like an oversized pad that a woman would wear during her period. And but it's made out of like a yoga mat material, and then there's like a cover on it that can be taken off and washed. And they've like found it super useful. We made something like that, and we didn't find it useful because the characters almost never have sex in missionary position. Like, that is literally the reason why.
Fun detail. Okay.
So because it only works because it's held in place by body weight, and it has to be like pinned from both sides. So usually, like if an actor's lying down, you put it between her legs, like a pad. And so like if they're in doggy style or they're standing or something, you can't really use it. So we haven't like been able to use things like that.
Well, spoiler alert for your show.
Yeah. Sorry guys, just ruined all the sex positions. But yeah, so like I would say what we've started to do is, as we've like developed like because the thing about intimacy coordination is because it's so new, we're still developing like our best practices and like what is the most efficient way to do all this stuff, keep everyone comfortable and safe and moving forward. And so one of the things we start doing is before we start an episode, we have an intimacy meeting and we all sit down, and I've usually done a breakdown of all the stuff, and I go through it with the director and the showrunner, and we have the conversation about what is it that you want. What do you like? What are your ideas for this scene? And like sometimes they'll be like, oh, I don't know, and I'll give suggestions, and we have a good conversation. And then after that, I'll give the notes to costumes, because like depending on like what the actor's boundaries are, it's like, oh, like so and so needs to be wearing this, or if they're going to be doing this position, then they need to be wearing this. So I talk to costumes about that, and then I go and I talk to the actors. And I say, hey, so the director is asking for this, this, and this. how do you feel about that? What are your boundaries? And then we have a conversation. And if there's like any discrepancy between the two, I go back to the director and I'm like, hey, so-and-so doesn't feel comfortable with doing this, but when I was talking to them, we discussed this as an alternative. So I try and like troubleshoot, and kind of like come up with like, well, we can't do this, but how about this option, and get them, as close as possible to whatever it was they were asking for.
And do you help the actors kind of define their boundaries? Like, do they all know coming in, or are people feeling it out?
Oh my God, no. And here's the thing is like, just because someone did a topless sex scene with one cast member one day doesn't mean they want to do that the next day. And so every single situation is unique and has to be treated that way because, it depends on who like who the acting partner is. So like, say they're super comfortable with one person, but then you have, they're like doing a random hookup scene like with another person, and they're like, I don't want to be topless with a stranger, but I trust the other person who's another principal cast member, right? Yeah. So we have conversations about that, and boundaries shift, and the best the best response I get is when I come in and I'm like, so the director would like this, and then the actor's like, I'm like, it's like,
let me interpret that.
It's like, let's have a conversation, because one of my big things is I'm like, this intimacy work as an actor can be really uncomfortable. However, and like, you may feel uncomfortable at times. However, you should never feel unsafe. And so I kind of help them tease apart like all the different reactions that we're having. And then by the end of that emerges either a strong yes, a maybe, or a no. And if it's a maybe, then that's a no. Is how I see it. It's like, if you're like wavering on it, then it's a no.
That's so interesting to pick apart what makes you uncomfortable versus what makes you unsafe. And up until this point, I bet people haven't been asked.
Oh, definitely not.
It's kind of revolutionary in the best kind of way. So let's talk about the nudity writers for a minute. Because in the past, it seemed like, you agree to be naked and that's it. Are you renegotiating those nudity writers as you go? Like, are they more specific now, or how does it work?
So we generally keep them relatively broad. Like, it'll be like, so-and-so agrees to do topless nudity with simulated sex. But like, if they're showing, like, we'll like specify if it's like, if they're showing breasts, or if they're showing their butt, or if they're doing full frontal nudity. But we usually keep it pretty broad, because then it gives a little bit more flexibility when you're filming. Because like, so sometimes what happens is the director's like, oh, I only want their right boob. Like we don't need the left. But if you got a writer for just the right boob, and then you realize, oh wait, that doesn't work with the shot, we actually need just the left one, you have to go get a new one, and the agent and the manager and the lawyer of the actor all have to approve. So
right, it's a meeting and $5,000 to change the language.
Yeah, and you're on set waiting, right? And it's just like, so instead of doing that, it's like, you just get topless nudity, so you could use either breast, unless of course the actor was like, no, you are only using this breast.
Wow. So there has to be a lot of trust involved.
Yeah. Well, so what we do is I work with one of the producers to draft the nudity writers, and before we send them out, we have the conversation. I have the conversation with the actor about where are your comfort level and boundaries, and so all of that is like considered before we even send it off to their agent, manager, and lawyer to have them like approve it.
So does it happen fairly late in the game? Like, do they already have their acting contract and you're already in prep and then you're negotiating the nudity writer? Yeah, so some people have pre-negotiated like nudity simulated sex contracts where they're like, this actor will do this, this, and this. And of course they can always say no. It's like, this is as far as I'm willing to go, but you can always pull it back. But a lot of the time they don't know what's coming, especially this is like, the tough thing about being an actor on a series. Most of the time you don't have the scripts, right? It's not written yet.
Yeah, and so you have no idea where they're going to go, and you're signing on to a project, whereas with a movie it's like you have the script, you know where it's going to go, it's kind of like a different deal. And so building, like a strong relationship with the actors where it's like they trust me, they know that like if they say I only want this to be shown, that's all that's going to be shown. shown, and I'm there to make sure that like their wishes are abided by, because if we don't have that trust, they're not going to want to keep doing sex and nudity.
Right.
They're going to be like, no, fuck, can I say fuck?
Yeah. You sure can.
They're going to be like, no, fuck you, why would I do that? You said my butt crack wouldn't be showing, and I can see a butt crack.
Yeah.
So, you know.
We're done.
Yeah, exactly. And another part of my job is like doing whatever I can to, make them feel as good as possible going into the scene. So whether that means making sure they have like the body makeup that they need, or making sure that their bra isn't see-through, or their underwear isn't see-through, whatever it is, we have to like consider all these like little factors to like help. Like if they're like, I want to do this scene, but here are like the things I need, I'm like, great, we will do those.
Wow. And I don't know if you're even able to answer this because you weren't necessarily there before, but have you heard feedback about how the set is before there were intimacy coordinators as opposed to after?
So one of the things that happens to me is ADs like to come up to me and start telling me horror stories of all the things that they had to deal with before I, on like previous projects, and they just like tell me these horror stories about
like
actors. Actors like getting assaulted on set and like all this like awful things. Like I don't remember who it was, but at some point someone was telling me like, oh yeah, I was working on like a premium channel show, and like there was like an orgy with like extras, and he was like, I'm pretty sure some of them were like actually having sex, which is like a big no-no, right?
Yeah.
And or like I've heard from another person on like a cable television channel show, which like doesn't even show nudity, right? But it had simulated sex. Like one of like the like actors was like being fingered, and it's just like this kind of stuff shouldn't be happening.
Right.
It should not be happening. And one of the nice things about having an intimacy coordinator on set is that whenever I walk on set, everyone's on their best behavior.
Yeah.
It's really funny.
So do you think the sexual harassment on set has also decreased?
I think so. Because like it's kind of like, when like the police are around, you're not going to speed.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like when the intimacy coordinator's around, you're not going to assault your acting partners.
Fantastic. Let's behave ourselves. And what a gift, because before you hear so many stories of women who wouldn't even say anything, or if they did, then they're difficult, or they're fired, or they don't get the next job, when none of that should have been happening in the first place.
Yeah.
That's a step in the right direction.
Right. And like the great thing is I tell the actors when I'm working with them, I'm like, you get to have boundaries. And a big part of the reason why this role exists is to interrupt the power dynamic between the director and like EPs with the actors. Because if they go up to them and they're like, we want you to do this, this, and this, most of the actors, they really want to like please the people they're working for. And so they'll say yes, even if they're like, oh, I don't really know how I feel about that, but I'm going to say yes anyway. And I was like, you can always tell me no. Like, I am happy to hear no from you. It is not a problem. Like, I'm not going to press you to do anything you don't want to do. And guess what? If, like, the director is unhappy with it, I'm the person that's going to deal with it. You don't have to deal with them.
It's amazing. I was going to ask you, so now during a sex scene or a nude scene, is the director still talking to the actors directly, or is all that going through you now? Yeah, no. So once I've had the conversation with the actor, I inform the director of, like, where the actor's boundaries are and stuff like that. And one of the things we make a point of is choreographing very specifically what's going to be happening during the scene, because like one of the worst things you can do is put two actors together for a sex scene and be like, just go at it. Yeah. Just like see what happens. God.
Because that's like a recipe for assault.
For sure.
Because most likely those two people haven't had a conversation together being like, these are my boundaries. What are your boundaries? Okay, great. Right? And so it's like, we don't want that to happen.
Right.
And so one of the things that we've been doing is I get together with the director and the showrunner, and we go through the whole scene and we choreograph it before we get with the actors. Because we try and like work out all the kinks and stuff, no pun intended, yeah. We try and work all that out like before they get in the room, so the because like if you're like changing things, you're like, oh, I don't know about that, and like the actors are like they can get like a little like, oh, like I don't know, it's a little.
I mean, it's got to be so weird.
It's weird, yeah. it doesn't feel good for the actors to like watch that process. It's better to just bring them in once we're like, okay, this is the game plan. It's like, that's all they need to know. They just need to know what the game plan is. And because I'm there, they know that the game plan is sticking to their boundaries and like their wishes that they've expressed. And then, you know, we go through the choreo and like a rehearsal with the actors and
like so specific, like put your left hand here, put your right hand here.
It's usually very specific.
Roll over.
Yeah.
And then do the actors ask each other permit, may I grab your boob? Like, is it like that?
No, it's not. It's not quite that mechanical. and then we won't choreograph it to within an inch of its life. We don't go quite that far. But what we will do is sometimes with stuff, I'll have a conversation with both the actors and I'll be like, hey, so how do you feel about improv? Because sometimes the director will be like, oh, but let's like try variations. I'll be like, okay, let's talk about improv. And so we just have a conversation about it. And if both people agree, like, yeah, I'd be open to trying this, then we talk about like, here are the things like please don't do. And then, you know, give them the blessing and go off, do the
just general informed consent.
Right, exactly. And it's just like, you know, it's like we don't want anyone to leave here feeling like they were violated. And so, like, you know, the improv isn't like, I'm not saying, some people are like, does that mean like improv is evil? And it's like, no, there's nothing like wrong with improv, but you just have to do it in an informed, consensual way and not just be like, go roll around.
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah.
Now, in this process, can people still change their mind?
Oh, yeah. So I always tell the actors, up until when the camera rolls, you always are allowed to change your mind. You can say no, you can just change pieces of it, whatever you want. But once the camera has rolled, it is the property of the studio, and they have the rights, and you can't take it back. Unless, for some reason, you have that in your contract that you have final say over what goes in.
Yeah.
And so I just make sure I'm like, you know, like once we do this, like that's it. The take is done. Yeah. And so one of the things that I'll do is to make sure that like they're happy with what's happening, because like a lot of times they'll be like, oh, I'm concerned about like how this body part like looks or whatever. Is once they're like in there and they're like, before they roll, I'll go and I'll take a picture of the monitor. And I'll go and show the actors so they can see exactly, like, you know, what's being seen, how they look, so they can adjust beforehand if they need to. Because it's like, once that camera rolls, it is what it is.
Yeah, you don't want to regret it.
Yeah, exactly.
How your rump looks from that angle.
Yep.
Gosh, it's such a hard job, the actor.
Yeah.
I think. Okay, so let's talk about this job that you have. Do you like it, first of all?
I do. The thing that I really like about it is that it's different every day. Like, there's always, like, some new thing, and, you know, I like that it's creative and that there's problem solving, and I still get to, like, talk about topics that are really important to me, and I get to help people, you know, figure out like what are my boundaries, and like, you know, kind of like start to think about that stuff. And I wouldn't go so far as to say like it's a different form of therapy or like coaching or whatever, but it kind of is, but you know, it's doing a lot of the same work, and it's helping people get in touch with like, you know, what cues is your body giving you about, is this a yes or a no, and stuff like that, and like cultivating better boundaries, and that I think, you know, applies to other areas of life. And then on set, like the other thing that happens is like I have people come up to me and they'll be like, you're the intimacy coordinator, right? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, so I have this question. And then they like start asking me, you know, like sex questions and stuff like that, because like of my background in sex and relationship coaching. And so I get to do, you know, kind of like
I wondered if people were pulling you aside for a little therapy.
Yeah.
And then I also wonder, because I know I have a friend who's a professor and teaches women's studies, and one of the side perks is hearing everybody's sexual assault story.
Yes.
Like, does that happen to you too?
That in particular doesn't, but I do get asked, I get lots of questions about fetishes and kinks and stuff like that. And people like being like curious about like learning more, or like it's the like fringe sexuality stuff. Cause like as this one person on set, he gave me the nickname of the sex lady.
Great.
Yeah, I was like, thank you. So people, come and like ask me their questions about that kind of stuff. And sometimes we have like interesting conversations about like relationship stuff and things like that.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you found your jam and you found your career?
Oh yeah. Oh my God. I've done, a bunch of different jobs and things. And obviously I studied a lot of different stuff over the years and like nothing really like clicked. And then I started doing this and I was like, oh yeah, this is like where I want to be.
What are those moments where you see all the things you've done in your past and they all come together and everything makes sense?
Right, because I think, my parents, saw me doing, advocates and SPLA and all this stuff, and they were like, why are you, like, you doing this, like,
What is that
these
about?
weird things, right? And it's like, and I never really thought that they'd, like, come in handy. I was just like, oh, this is just something I'm interested in. And then it's, like, looking back, and it's like, oh, that all, like,
It all makes sense
It all makes sense now.
Now, how many of you are there in the business?
There's only a handful of people. So in Los Angeles, I'm the only person that I know of. And if anyone knows anyone else, please put them in contact with me because I'd love to know because I get more calls than I can take.
Yeah, there should be a club and you should be networking.
Yeah.
What, your background seems perfect for this job. Do you think that is the background or do you think you could have 10 different backgrounds and end up in this job? Like what do you think that person needs to have?
I think the big things are you have to be a really strong communicator. You have to be really good at reading people. I have trauma training, so if you see someone starting to get like a little bit triggered about like what's going on, you have to be able to like intervene and be like, okay, we need to like take a break or what have you, whatever's going on.
And you get that just by reading their face, their body language?
Yeah, and what they're doing with their voice, stuff like that. And it's also really important, obviously, that you be comfortable talking about sex.
Yeah.
And one of the things, that is so obvious, to me when I do this work is that so many people are so uncomfortable with talking about sex. And
I'd say hardly anyone is.
Yeah.
Comfortable.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, it's just funny because like all my friends, are like in like the world of like relationship sexuality stuff. And so like
your circle, you're all talking about it at the dinner party.
Yeah, it's like normal. It's like whatever, like it's fine, it's comfortable. And so like, and then I sometimes like, forget that like 99% of the population is like the S word.
Yes,
SEX. And so, so being able to, like, talk about sex is super important. And then also being, at the very least, like, informed and reasonably knowledgeable about, like, LGBTQ stuff, and likely I think it's important to be like kink friendly, kink sensitive, so that you're not like getting on set and like talking about it and like shaming people, because it's like you don't know what other people like to do in their private lives.
Here's this weird thing we have to talk about.
Right, and so like being non-judgmental is like super important because it's like you don't know who you're talking to, and you don't want to make people feel bad about their sexuality. Yeah, so being a strong communicator, non-judgmental, kink, LGBTQ, friendly, all that kind of stuff is super, super important.
And let's talk about pronouns for a minute.
Okay.
I know that's a hot topic and
yes.
people are struggling with it.
I get text messages sometimes on set being like, do you know what this person's gender pronoun is? I'm like, I think it's funny how I'm like
You're the oracle.
I'm the preferred gender pronoun, like reference.
Now, okay, so here's a legit question. If you're on set and you don't know and you want to find out and there isn't an intimacy coordinator, how do you ask?
I am a pretty straightforward person, so I would just be like, hey, I'm just wondering, what is your preferred gender pronoun?
Oh, that's one way to do it, sure.
Yeah. That's what
just ask.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because the thing is like, I think the worst thing that you can do is treat it like this scary thing and be like, oh, I don't want to go near that, because that just piles shame on top of...
Right, if you're weird about it.
Right.
Is it probably safe to assume that if you feel like you need to ask the question, then you probably need to ask the question and they're not going to be offended by you asking the question?
Yeah. No, because the thing is like, whoever it is, that you're not sure about, they probably want you to use the right gender pronoun for them.
Right.
And it's one of those things where it's like, you can't necessarily know by looking at someone.
Right.
You don't know what they go by, so just ask. That's my approach.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay, how can people reach you? You have a website, don't you?
I have a website, yeah, intimacycoordinator.com.
Oh, that's
very easy to remember.
Point.
And then my email is intimacycoordinator@gmail.com.
Okay.
So very easy. And then the rest of my contact info is on there.
Great. So I'm just thinking about the future of this position. You're on the ground floor, you and Alicia. Are you thinking about how do we train new people? How do we create community? How do we expand this?
Yeah, I've been thinking about how do we get more people doing this, because there is a need, and I've had probably 4 or 5 different networks reach out to me and be like, we have shows.
Yeah, you can't do every show.
Right, exactly. Yeah, especially with the amount of sex and nudity on Euphoria. I think that obviously people who have a background like mine where it's more of a counseling, coaching background is like super useful, but obviously there's like a really big learning curve to being on a movie set. Mm-hmm. And whereas, but then you can have someone who comes at it from being some other type of coordinator, like if you had like a production coordinator or whatever, and they wanted to like make the transition, and they already know, how the whole film thing functions, but they maybe don't have they need to get the other skills. The other skill sets, right. And so it's like, how do you go about training people and like vetting them and making sure that like, they're gonna be able to like go in there and do the job well. Because one of the things we sometimes say is that like it can be better to have no one in there doing it than the wrong person.
Yeah.
Because the wrong person is not good for, a show.
Do you think there's a training program in your future?
Whew, I don't know, maybe.
Let's make it an empire.
Who knows? I mean, LA needs more intimacy coordinators, so.
Yeah, and it seems obvious, but it seems like this happened all around Me Too and Time's Up, and just the time was right.
Yeah.
For people to be open, and how do we make this better? It's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I definitely, the current cultural climate that we're in is, I think, what has made this role possible. And I think it's, really exciting that as a culture, we're like ready to like start having these conversations, and like people on sets are really excited, and they're like, finally someone to do this job, because I don't want to be doing all those things, because, it kind of like a lot of the pieces of my job would have like fallen to like an AD or whoever, and then they're the ones having to deal with like all the awkward situations.
Yeah, they're not really equipped necessarily.
Right.
Maybe if you get really lucky, but
yeah, and usually,
it must be such a relief to everybody.
Yeah. And then same thing, with like dealing with like the nudity writers and stuff like that. I'm the one who goes and has the conversations, and the producers are like, thank God I don't have to do that.
It is a gift. They are so happy you have arrived.
Yeah.
In the scope of things, I imagine this is a fairly well-paying job.
Yes.
And did you have to go in and negotiate hard, or did they just offer you the world?
It took, for my season contract, it took 4 weeks of negotiation to get them to where I wanted to be.
Now, did you do that yourself, or did you have a representation?
Oh, I did it.
Okay, tell me about it.
Oh, I did it.
So, how?
So because it's a new position, I was on the pilot, which we filmed separately from, the rest of the series. They were like 2 months apart. So I had my rate for the pilot, which was pretty low. And I accepted it because I was like, oh, this will be fine. Like, they won't need me that much. And then it turned into like an almost everyday thing. And I was like...
It's a full-time job.
It's
a lot of responsibility.
Yeah. And so going into the full season, I was like, they were like, oh, how about this much? And I was like, I need 60% more. And they looked at me and they were like, what? And then, I laid out my case. I was like, I have all these skills. I do all these things for you guys. I gave you every single thing you wanted on the pilot. Everything they asked for, I was able to get for them. And like everyone had like a good experience. And
the money you save in liability
oh my God,
pays for you 1,000 times.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's the other big thing to consider is like, people are like, oh my God, it's like all this money to pay this person to be here and do this. But it's like, well, how much does a lawsuit cost?
Yeah. How much would it cost not to have you there?
Right. Or it's like, or the damage to like the company's reputation.
Yeah.
And, so.
Or to a person.
Right. I know. And the psychological cost to like the people that you could be damaging, if they're put in a situation that's not safe.
And we know those HBO people, they're good people. They don't want to hurt anybody.
Oh, no.
They want to do the right
not.
thing.
Yes, they do. And so I went into it being like, I know what my value is. I know what my work is worth. I've shown it to you guys. And now I'm asking you to pay me this much. And we had to go back and forth on it for a while because they were hemming and hawing and then like trying to kind of like ignore the fact that like the shoot date was coming up, and I was like, hey guys, we need to like, finish my deal.
Yeah.
And I kind of had to poke him a bit. But what's funny is I have a boyfriend, and he was very helpful in propping up my confidence for this conversation. He was like, Amanda, when I go in there to like negotiate for my salary or whatever, I don't take it as a reflection of like what is my worth as a person. He was like, you have to differentiate between the two things and don't take offense when they come back with lower numbers. Just like matter-of-factly be like, okay, well, I'm just telling you, like, this is how much I need. And he was like, the biggest thing you can do is like stay calm and be confident, and don't go into like this fear place of like, oh, well, maybe I'm not actually worth that much, and so I'm just going to back down.
Maybe I'll do it anyway, whatever, it's fine.
Right. And it's like, obviously you have to like read your audience, right? Yeah. And, and like if they never came back and were like, this is the final offer, take it or leave it. Like we never got to that place. But I was just like, guys, this is how much I need. And I also actually had listened to one of your podcasts. I don't remember who it was with. I listened to it like before I did my deal negotiation.
Was it Women Don't Ask? Sarah Lashever?
Yes, I think it was that one.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and so that gave me a little confidence because I was like, because the other thing is that whatever I was getting paid is going to start to set a precedent for how much this position is going to be making.
Yes.
And so I was like, guys, I'm not taking a lowball number because you're being cheap. And I made the point. I was like, this is setting a precedent, and
there are a lot of people coming behind you. And if I had to guess, it's going to be a female-dominated position.
Yeah.
Which we tend to devalue and pay less.
Exactly.
Good for you.
It's right, because this kind of stuff is seen as, air quotes, the work of women.
It's soft. It's emotional labor.
Right. And so it's hard for people to understand the value up front. They get it later on because they're like, oh my God, we were so glad you're here. But up front, they're like, why would we pay for that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just did a solid for womankind.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so whenever I get interviewed and people are like, how much do they make? The answer I like to give is like, if you're an intimacy coordinator and you work full time, you can make 6 figures.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a well-paying job.
It's amazing. All right. I love that story. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for doing this.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. I'd like to thank Amanda Blumenthal for sharing her story, and special thanks to Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Allison McQuaid for the music. Please find us on your favorite podcast provider and leave a review, and of course on our website, theother50%.com, all spelled out in letters, for added features, bios of our guests, and the merch. You can also follow us on all the social media platforms, and also go subscribe to catchabreakpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.